Welcome to the Play Their Way podcast, where we talk about all things in child first coaching. I'm your host, Laura Jane Jones, and today I'm excited to welcome our special guest, Jemima Browning. Welcome, Jemima. I'm so pleased to welcome you on today. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Happy to be here.
Good. Jemima, despite being in only her early 20s, is already an award-winning sports coach and disability participation advocate. Inspired by her younger brother who has Down syndrome, she set up the Stingrays Swimming Club, which she'll tell us a bit more about later, I'm sure. In 2017, Jemima was recognised for her work creating positive social change, receiving a Diana Award from Princes William and Harry. Jemima, that's some CV for someone so young. I've mentioned your brother there, but tell me what's the why behind the Stingrays programme? What inspired you to get that started?
So ultimately, we've always had a very positive outlook as a family on disability. Always seen it that it's not something that should stop you doing the things that you want to do. But we kind of met a few barriers, societal barriers, along our journey of making sure that Will could do everything that he wanted to. And swimming was always a sport of mine and my sister's, and we wanted him to be able to do it as well. And there wasn't the opportunity for him. So kind of just sat there and thought, okay, well, if the world isn't going to create this opportunity, then down to me to make that change, and created Tadcaster Stingrays, which is a disability swim squad for those 11 to 25 with all ranges of disabilities.
Jemima, how did it feel for you as a able-bodied neurotypical teenager to see your brother and his peers being left behind a bit by participation and just being able to get involved in things?
It was really heartbreaking, actually, especially because, as I said, as a family, we had such a positive outlook. To then find that society didn't meet people like my brother with the same positivity was really difficult. And also to watch the knock-on effect that had on Will and so many other people with disabilities as well, that it didn't just impact, their ability to take part in sport, it impacted his whole life, his confidence, his ability to make friends, his ability to be proud of himself, everything. It was just really difficult to kind of see. And I think a lot of it, it's not from a place of kind of a bad place when it comes to society's view. It's more lack of understanding, and it's just about educating and realigning that and making sure that people have equal opportunities.
It's really interesting when you talk about realigning and equal opportunity, because I know that from my personal experiences, I've got a relative who also has Down syndrome, and I see the participation barriers that he's faced. It's a lot of the time, isn't it? It's about what participation means. Sport isn't always about competition. So how important is it from a social aspect for young people with disabilities to have somewhere that they can get involved?
Hugely important, and it really is. It sounds like an exaggeration, but it's not. Groups like Stingrays are life-changing for the person themselves, for the families, but also for society. At Tadcaster Stingrays, we really pride ourselves of being that safe space where young people can be themselves without judgment, and that their needs can be met, and that they have a voice to say, actually, these are what the things I want to do, or these are the things that I need help with. Can you do that with me? And it's then that achievement and the allowing the achievement there that has a huge knock-on effect of a positive spiral of self-esteem growing, confidence growing, social skills growing, that then has an impact on the person as a whole and family and then society as well, which is just, it's an amazing thing to be part of.
When you talk about achievement, how much is that linked to achievement as a group or achievement in terms of results, or is it just a personal achievements for the Stingrays group?
I'd say more definitely towards the personal achievement side of things. We have 18 swimmers now, which is incredible. And each of them have, as I said, varying abilities and disabilities. And at Stingrays, we focus on the abilities and finding ways to break down barriers that each person might face. And it's all about that person-centered coaching or person-centered goal setting that we ask each of the swimmers, okay, what do you want to do? Whether that be session by session, or whether that be, okay, in 3 months' time, where do you want to be? And because of the nature of a group like Stingrays, where we do have such a wide variety of individuals, there's going to be a wide variety of achievements within that. So it's really about focusing on the person as an individual and where their achievements are and maximizing their potential.
If we look at the pillars of sport and we take kind of competition out of it, if this is about individual achievement, we can talk about participation and fitness and how important that is to a disability community. But how much fun exists at Stingrays and how important is that to the group?
Absolutely. Fun is kind of centered around everything that we do. You know, it's not a good session unless people have had fun. And that's how I go into each session. That yes, we have the training side of things. Yes, we have the, okay, let's increase this specific stroke technique or whatever it might be. But underlying it is, have you made friends? Have you had fun with your friends? And do you come away from the session feeling happier than when you went in? And even if I'm not seeing huge leaps and bounds in the competition side of things or the stroke technique, if the swimmer comes at the beginning of the session and they leave happier than when they came in, that's how I see that's been a successful session for that person.
Sounds amazing. I love that. You've already talked a bit about self-advocacy, and I'm really glad that you brought that up because that's obviously been a big theme of the Play Their Way campaign and a big part of what it's hooked on. But I'm really intrigued as to how you manage that in people who are perhaps non-verbal, because we know that there are people in the disabled community who might be affected by that. So if somebody can't tell you feedback, how do you manage that?
It is definitely, I wouldn't say it's a barrier, but it is definitely something extra to think about. I often talk about when coaching in the disability realm, it's you've got to think outside the box and you've got to find new ways of doing things that might seem a little bit out there to people that aren't within the community, but it's things that you do to make sure the needs of the person are being met. So, for example, it's never just asking the person, okay, how do you want to do this? My first and foremost kind of step to that is working out how this person best communicates. And that might be verbally, that might be gestures, that might be with pictures, that might be talking with the family. You know, it's working out how that person likes to communicate their wants, their needs, and their ambitions, and then tapping into that. So it's a very individualized process and getting to know each swimmer, which sounds like a bit of a task, but actually it in the long run it makes your job a lot easier if you work out from the beginning, how does this person best communicate, how can I communicate with them, then it makes the whole process a lot more streamlined and also a lot more accessible and fun for this individual as well. You know, there's no point in talking to someone and expecting them to talk back to you loads if that's not the way they like to communicate. Tailoring it to each person.
Now that you look at coaching in that way, how much has that become an instinct? Not just in disability coaching, but say you were coaching able-bodied swimmers in a child group. How much would you look for non-verbal cues from them?
Hugely, you know, this it's been a as much as I have experience in this from growing up with my brother, coaching in this way has taught me so much, and the young people with disabilities have taught me so much. And this is all applicable to the mainstream world as well. You know, everything is about creating small individual changes or reasonable adjustments, and that can all be transferred into the mainstream world as well. It's about seeing the person as an individual, working out the best way they communicate, and then using that to make their kind of achievements and goals reachable. And it's definitely, I take that with me in whatever realm I'm in, you know, whether that be coaching disability, whether that be coaching a mainstream club, or even in, you know, everyday interactions, working out, okay, this person I'm trying to communicate with, how's the best way to reach them? And it's all about just using the skills that I've got. And that's why I'm so grateful to be in the position that I am, to have learned all these skills and be able to apply them in so many different areas.
How much do you feel like you do take one from the other and give it to the other when you're straddling mainstream and disability coaching? Does it work both ways?
Yeah, 100%. It definitely works, vice versa. And things that I learn from the mainstream world, I'll take into disability and vice versa. And it's constantly learning as well. I think being a good coach is having the ability to adapt and never kind of sit back and think, oh, okay, well, I've done this for 5 years now, I know everything there is to know. It's constantly learning from everyone, because at the end of the day, everyone's an expert in themselves. And it's about tapping into that young person and thinking, okay, you know you are the expert in yourself. How can I facilitate that? And learning from their experiences and constantly thinking, how can I do this better? Or how could I have done this differently? And that comes through communication as well, you know, asking a young person, did I meet your needs? It doesn't have to be that kind of sit down formal chat, but having that open line of communication where a young person can say, actually, this didn't work for me, can we do it this way? And creating that safe space of having that open two-way conversation.
You're actually the youngest guest we've had so far on the series, so I'm really intrigued to hear how you felt you self-advocated when you were swimming as a junior and participating in sport. Is it something you always felt empowered to do?
Actually, no. It was definitely something that I learned more as a coach than as I did as a young person. And so I was always a swimmer. And I had some great coaches, don't get me wrong, they were fantastic and I had a really good time. But I never felt empowered to say, actually, this is what I need, this is what I want. And I think from having that experience, it's made me even more motivated to make sure that other young people have that space where they feel empowered, and they feel that they can stand up for what they want and what they need to do.
How much do you think it would have changed your experiences as a teenage swimmer? Would it have been through achievement? Would it have been through enjoyment? How would you have felt differently about swimming had you had more of a voice?
I think it would have been a combination of achievement and enjoyment, because if I felt more empowered to stand up for what I needed or wanted within the realm of training, I would have enjoyed the training more, which would have meant that I would have engaged with the training more and potentially for longer than I did. And then the achievement would have kind of naturally come out of that. Um, so just the more sustainable enjoyment of it would have then naturally led to higher achievement levels, if that makes sense.
And when you say those things that you enjoyed more, as somebody who's just come out of a youth participation scenario, really, you're only in your early 20s now, how much did you feel that fun dropped off as you got older in sport? And how much is it an important thing that we recognise that needs to remain, even when we're coaching young people into being more serious athletes?
Massively, I felt a huge kind of shift in pressure as I got older within the sport. There was a huge pressure on having to train a certain amount of time, and the training became more focused on achievement and less focused on enjoyment. And I think that needs to be flipped completely. It needs to be switched of focus more on the enjoyment, and then whatever achievement comes out of that will be the product of the enjoyment. And also the sustainability of that training becomes so much better and so much easier if the people are enjoying it, and there's that element of fun there as well. And then, you know, it's also looking that not everybody will achieve at the same level, but that hasn't meant that they've not achieved, because achievement comes from a personal goal setting scenario, or it should do. And so it's not looking, okay, everyone has to train at the same exact level to get to the same exact achievement level. It's looking, okay, how can we make sure that everyone's enjoying themselves to enable them to feel empowered, and then for them to achieve in whatever kind of capacity that that is for that individual.
From a personal experience point of view, how many friends did you see drop off and become less enthused and less engaged by sport because that enjoyment wasn't there? Do you think that's a real barrier to continued participation, especially in young women?
Yeah, 100%. I saw that a lot. You know, it was kind of, and it is around the time where, you know, there's more pressure from school as well in terms of exams. I think that's a real kind of tipping point at the one that I experienced as well. That when the outer world or your academic world starts to become more pressurized, you look towards sport as more of a enjoyment escape mechanism. But then if that also becomes really high pressure, then there's just too much and you have to choose one way or the other. And that happens too often. And it's putting far too much pressure on something like sport that should be enjoyable and that should be a way of escaping the pressures of everyday society. And I can't say that I had an experience that was kind of that happened more for females than males, because for me it was kind of across the board. Everyone, when they got to that age, had the too much pressure scenario, and then too many people dropped that could have continued for many more years.
It's so incredible to hear you say that, Jemima, because we're a few podcasts into this series, and you're the first person who's talked about those external pressures that are on young people, because I don't think we recognise enough that they do have pressure, and academic one is obviously the biggest one, and social pressures, and that is why it's so important for sport to be that release. And as we've heard on this podcast previously, we don't sport, we play sport, and we should continue playing as teenagers and adults. I want to talk to you about the Youth Sports Trust, because you've been a huge supporter there and have been a youth board member, a pretty lofty title. How empowering has that organisation been for you, and how much is that a place that you found your voice?
Hugely. I cannot thank the Youth Sport Trust enough for all the work that they do, nationally, but also the amount of work that I feel they put into me, and the amount of empowerment that I felt just being part of the youth board. And I was on there for a long time, so kind of had the experience of watching it just get stronger and stronger and stronger, and for having my voice listened to. And when I first joined, I was a little bit nervous that it could be potentially tokenistic or just for show, but it couldn't be further from the truth with the Youth Sport Trust Youth Board. It is there. It is an active youth board. The members of the main board listened to us. They took on board everything that we would say. It might not have always been that they had the capacity to say yes to all of our ideas, but they always listened and always had that two-way conversation of, okay, we hear you, this is what we can do, this is what we can't do. And just, I felt so heard and so listened to, and it gave me the confidence to then speak to other people about it. Because I always find as a young person that I feel like I don't know what I'm talking about. Sometimes there's definitely an element of kind of imposter syndrome, in particular when I'm talking to people who may have worked in this field for 20, 30 years, who might be very stuck in their ways and not as receptive to what I'm trying to say. But I now meet it with more confidence, and whether they listen or not, that's up to them. But I have the right to say what I have to say, because I am an expert in my own situation and from my own experiences. I'm not an expert in everything to do with disability sport, don't get me wrong, but the things that I've experienced and the scenarios that I've dealt with have led me to be an expert in a certain few areas. And if I don't share that, then who else is going to do it for me?
If I can just give you one bit of advice, it's that imposter syndrome never gets away from you, because I'm a hell of a lot older than you and I still feel like that all the time. How much has finding a voice in sport made you feel more confident in the rest of your life? Because that's one thing that I'm always really keen to talk about and explore, is the tools that we are given through sport and the things that we learn in a sports environment we take into every other facet of our life. So has it made you a more confident person, having that empowerment from the Youth Sports Trust and from sport?
Absolutely. I think I know I would be a completely different person had I not been involved in sport and learnt the things I had from sport and from the Youth Sport Trust and the empowerment I felt there. And I've also seen that hugely within Tadcaster Stingrays as well, that actually it's not, swimming is a very small part of what we do at Tadcaster Stingrays. The huge improvement that I've seen from our young people in every single aspect of their life, from having that sense of belonging and having somewhere where they're listened to and their needs are met, that it just spreads into every single aspect of their lives. And to watch that growth is incredible, and to have experienced it myself as well, I just feel very privileged to be part of that.
It's amazing. One thing that I have to ask you about, Jemima, so I've got lots of friends who've coached with the Youth Sports Trust and been involved in it, and I always like to hear their stories of their favourite things that they've got to do through the Youth Sports Trust. So I want to hear about some of those opportunities you've had and places you've gone and people you've met, and why it's been so special for you.
Oh, there's actually so many that I won't be able to go through them all. But a couple, the yearly conference is always a great experience. Talking to so many different experts, hearing from so many different experts in their fields, just that real networking opportunity as well. And then I think one of my favourites my absolute favourites was when I had an opportunity alongside my brother, with a project called Play Unified, which was all about people with and without disabilities doing sport together. And we actually went to speak at the House of Lords, and this was a few years ago. And my brother's always been quite a shy person, but we'd planned this presentation, and he was so nervous. But to watch him and to be alongside him doing this presentation, I've never felt more proud of him than I did in this moment, because he was in a room full of strangers, quite a large room, talking to everybody, and just hearing him use his voice. And even throughout the presentation, he became more and more confident when he saw that people were listening to him, and just the boost that that gave him. And then he's just grown in confidence ever since, and I am forever thankful for that experience.
That's a beautiful response, Jemima, because most people say it's meeting someone famous. I think one of the big things with Play Their Way is that this is twofold. It's about listening to children and listening to youths in sport and their self-advocacy and keeping fun as part of it. How much have you seen that change over the years? As you've mentioned, you were a member of the youth board for quite a few years. Have you seen things trending more positively lately? Do you think that people are now keyed into listening to children and young people in sport a bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned the Youth Sport Trust conferences as a great networking experience. And I've been to 3 or 4 now, and each and every single year, the more people I spoke to, the more progressive the conversations were becoming, the more they were discussion around person-centered coaching and youth voice and all of these things. And I've really seen an increase in those conversations that are being had. And I think that, well, I hope that that will continue, and that it will just get more and more shifting in the positive direction of making sure that we're focusing on the fun, focusing on the individual, and listening to young people, and where possible meeting their needs and expectations.
I guess finally then, I want your kind of piece of golden advice for coaches who know that they need to listen a bit more to the youths that they're coaching and perhaps want to bring a bit more self-advocacy from the people that are involved in their groups and their coaching classes. What's the piece of advice that you might have as a starting block for that?
I think that it's just remembering that young people are the experts in their own needs. They're the experts in how other people need to meet those needs, and they know in their heart what they want to achieve. And it's listening to that and doing everything you can to facilitate that on an individual basis. And also remembering that not everyone communicates in the same way, working out and tapping into that individual, how they communicate to then maximize their own potential. Because I think not listening to them in the first place or not asking those questions is automatically putting a cap on where that person can be. But opening up that communication allows this young person, through you helping to create the opportunities or to make the reasonable adjustments, it allows them to maximize their potential and show the world what they can do.
Absolutely fantastic, Jemima. You've been a wonderful guest. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
We can't thank you enough, and we can't thank you all for listening at home. We hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. Be sure to leave us a review and share this with someone else who you think might like it too. Check out our website, www.playtheirway.org, and follow Play Their Way on social media, at Play Their Way on TikTok, X and LinkedIn, and at Play Their Way UK on Facebook and Instagram.